Okay, today the lesson is 8.2, and 8.2 is on percents, fractions, and decimals. Now, you know from lesson 8.1 that fractions, decimals, and percents are three different ways to represent the same thing. Basically, we are showing part of a whole or part of a total. But a fraction is a part. A decimal is a part, and a percent is also a part. With percents, we are showing how many out of 100. Okay? Now, but you can use percents, fractions, and decimals to all represent the same thing. All right? The first part of this lesson, we're going to write percents as fractions and decimals. Okay? So we're going to write 35% as a fraction, and then we're going to write 35% as a decimal. And we're just going to show that 35% can be shown as a fraction, as a decimal, or as a percent. Okay? So percent actually means per 100 or out of 100. So if we have 35%, we have 35 out of 100. Or we could say we have 35 per 100. Okay? So we would write that as a ratio 35 out of 100. Okay? 35 compared to 100. The next thing we're going to do if we want to find the fraction is we're going to simplify this ratio. Okay? 35 100s. I know that can be simplified because I know there is a number that can fit into both 35 and fit into 100 evenly. If there is no number that can fit into the numerator and the denominator, then it's already simplified. But 35 and 100 have a common factor, and that factor is 5. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 5, divide by 5. With fractions, if you multiply the top and the bottom times the same number, you get an equivalent fraction. Also, if you divide the top and the bottom by the same number, you get an equivalent fraction, and you get a simplified equivalent fraction. So 35 divided by 5 is 7. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. And so the 35% is the same as the fraction 7/20. This is the simplified, or this is the fraction in the simplest form, okay, reduced to lowest terms. Now, that's how you write a percent as a fraction. You make the percent out of 100, and then you simplify. Okay. Next, we're going to write 35% as a decimal. So we're going to write the decimal equivalent of 35 out of 100. Well, we know that the denominator of a fraction, if it is a base 10 number, like 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 and so on, that gives me the place value in the decimal. Since this is 100, the 35 needs to be in the hundredths place. So the decimal would be 0.35 because this 5 is actually in the hundredths place. Right? The hundredths place. The 5 is in the hundredths place. So this is 35 100ths. Okay? And this is 35 100ths. So 35% as a decimal is 0.35. All right? So let's do a couple practice problems, all right? We're going to do the first one, and I'm going to just write a line right here to separate the top one from the bottom one, okay? We're going to do a fraction and a decimal for 15%. So again, we're going to start with the fraction, 15 out of 100, but that can be simplified because, again, 5 can go into both 15 and 100. So I'm going to divide by 5 and divide by 5, and I get 3/20. So 15% as a fraction is 3/20. So now let's do the decimal, okay? We're going to do the decimal. I know that it's 15 out of 100. And again, that denominator 100 tells me I need to be in the hundredths place. So that's going to be 0.15. And this is the hundredths place. That 5 is in the hundredths place. The 1 is in the tenths place. The 5 is in the hundredths place. So it's 15 100ths. Okay. So 3/20ths is the fraction for 15%. And 0.15 is the decimal for 15%. Okay. Let's do 6% as a fraction and a decimal. Okay. The fraction again is going to be 6 out of 100. And that can also be simplified because 2 can go into 6 and 2 can go into 100. So I'm going to divide by 2 and divide by 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 100 divided by 2 is 50, and that is the fraction of 6%, 3/50. So now let's do the decimal. It's going to be 6 out of 100. Remember that the 6 has to be in the hundredths place. So that means I need to do 0.06. Okay, because this is 6 hundredths, and this is also 6 100ths, because that 6 is now in the hundredths place. Okay. So now we're going to switch. What we've been doing is taking percents and writing them as fractions and decimals. Now we're going to start with a fraction and write the fraction as a decimal or a percent. All right, there's a couple ways to do this. We're going to start with 96 200ths. We're going to write that as a decimal. And then we're going to take 96 200ths and write it as a percent. So remember, 96 200ths, we want to figure out what is that out of 100, because remember, a percent is out of 100. So what can I do to get 200 to be 100? I can divide by 2. 200 divided by 2 is 100. So if I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. So if I divide 96 by 2, and you can use a calculator during this module. So you can get out your calculator and do 96 divided by 2, you will get 48. So now I have 48 100ths. So that as a decimal is 0.48, because that 8 is in the 100ths place. Okay. Now, if I want to write 96 200ths as a percent, I would do the same thing. 96 200ths is the same as 48 100ths. And we know that percent is out of 100, so that is 48%. If you're going to write a percent, you always have to write the percent sign after it. Okay, that is the percent symbol. So 48 100ths, and remember, percents means out of 100. That means that's 48%. Okay, now let's do 1/8 as a decimal and a percent. So 1/8, okay. If I want to find the decimal to that, I could try to figure out what is that out of 100, right? I could set a proportion and put 100 down here and solve for the missing number. But also, with a fraction, the fast way to find the decimal is to use a calculator. And in this module, you are allowed to use a calculator. Remember, a fraction is always a division problem. This fraction says 1/8, but it also says 1 divided by 8. Okay, 1 divided by 8. So you have one piece, and the whole was cut into 8 pieces, and you have one piece out of 8. So as a decimal, we would go 1 divided by 8, and we would get the decimal. Okay, so we would do 1 divided by 8, and we get 0.125. That is the decimal of 1/8. Now, how do I change that to a percent? Well, when I already have a decimal, if I can just figure out, this is the hundredths place, this 12, right? That 12 is in the hundredths place, the 1 and the 2. The 1 is in the tenths, the 2 is in the hundredths. So this is how many out of 100. So 12 12.5 out of 100 because that 2 is in the hundredths place. In other words, to take a decimal and make it a percent, you just move the decimal over 2 places. 12.5%. Okay, so 12.5 out of 100 tells you the percent, which is 12.5%. Remember, percent is always out of 100. And how did I get 12.5? I used this 1/8 as a decimal is 0.125. And I want the hundredths place, which is right here, because I want out of 100. So I move the decimal to the hundredths place. And that's how you get the percent. Okay? That is lesson 8.2. We learned how to write a percent as a fraction and a decimal. Then we learned how to write a fraction as a decimal and a percent.